All right, listen, if canceling rent is your slogan, what do you call it when your household ends up cashing the rent checks and your husband ends up getting a massive slice of a city megadeal? That's not some like clever late night tweet here. That's the reality of what's happening. And today I'm going to, let's say, untangle what I'd like to call the Ayanna Pressley Paradox, which is a massive gap between her front-facing brand and her back-facing balance sheet. And I think by the end of this video, you'll see why this isn't really a story just about housing. It's a story about hypocrisy, the H word. Yes. So let's start with this. Let's start at the heart of the web here and what's going on. Because recently, Boston rolled out plans to turn the Water and Sewer Commission parking lots, there in Roxbury, by the way, into actual housing units. On paper, that does sound like some levels of progress. More houses and less asphalt, let's call it, okay? And equity for a neighborhood that's been on the wrong end of the development spectrum for a very, very long time. And in April of 2024, the Boston Planning and Development Agency, they ended up giving what's called a tentative designation to a team led by Related Beal and a smaller firm called Dream Development, I think was the name of it. And they're in the process to build over 400 units. I think it's 403 or 404 units. It's a lot. So the numbers, they sound pretty civic-minded, right? Like 89% of the units that are going to be built here are going to be some form of affordable units, whether they are rentals or whether they're condos for sale or for, let's say, moderate income buyers, or maybe even some levels of senior housing. I don't think the plans have detailed it to that extent. Now, on the surface, this is City Hall somewhat doing its job because they are transferring public land and they are turning it into like a public purpose. But here's the twist. And it's the twist that blows the whole entire story wide open. So Dream Development's partner list includes one name that jumps off the page, and that is Conan Harris. This is the husband of Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. He's not some kind of like silent investor. He's not anonymous. He's not like some anonymous LLC. He's listed by name as a partner, as an investor, which means that this project, if this goes forward, he's going to share in all of the upside on this. And that's, of course, that's not me speculating here. That's just the mechanics of how this partnership is more than likely going to work. You own equity, you share in the profits. Now, your gut might be thinking the same thing that I did the first time I read this. Oh, great, another, let's say, sweetheart, insider, no bid deal. That's what I was thinking here. I thought this was similar to like the MassDOT deal, where there was like these, insider text messages and emails and all this stuff going on. But I don't think that exactly happened here. This was not the same as the MassDOT deal. This wasn't a no-bid contract. There was a request for proposals, and after months of community meetings, there were two teams that submitted bids in early 2024. Then the review committee met. They ended up meeting multiple times here. And the BPDA, their board, ultimately advanced Related Beal and Dream back in April. So yes, this was at least seems to be a competitive bid. There's a paper trail by the RFP, and you could even look at this stuff on the city's website. So there wasn't like a shady handshake or a smoky back alley deal here. At least that's the way it looks to me as of right now. Could things change in the future? Maybe. And calling it competitive, like here's the thing, guys, calling this competitive, I don't think it erases the optics, because we have a sitting member of Congress, their spouse ends up winning the development roster for public land in her own district. So it doesn't look good. Both things could be true at once here. The process was technically fair, but the perception, it just is not a good look. which means the, let's say, political question isn't just illegal, is this credible, right? If your brand is public land for public good, you'd better build some level of a firewall high enough to block any suspicion of self-dealing here. Because even if this is legitimate, even if it's a legitimate bid, by the paperwork, it's the optics that are, let's just call them radioactive, right? People in Roxbury already complained. They got their voices basically drowned out in development decisions here. And when they see a congresswoman, their husband, benefiting from a project within their own district, it doesn't really take a law degree to guess what they'll think next. Okay? It doesn't. The fix was in. That's what most people are more than likely thinking. And that's just one act of the paradox, because the deeper hypocrisy, let's say, lives within Act 2, and that's the cancel rent saga. I don't know if you remember this, but I will remind you. Remember back in 2020, 2021 during COVID, the pandemic had millions of people struggling to pay their mortgages, to pay their rent. And Ayanna Pressley co-led the Rent and Mortgage Cancellation Act. And this was very, very bold legislation that would have forgiven rent and mortgage payments outright while creating there was a relief fund on the back end. So landlords, they wouldn't eat those losses, okay? I don't think she's ever said that in one of her ridiculous speeches, but that's the way that it goes. She said that housing is a human right and that no one should have to choose between groceries and rent. I agree with that. And we needed systematic relief. Now, the rhetoric here was purely ridiculous, okay, with tenants, especially Black and brown renters bearing the brunt of COVID's economic wreckage. But while she was preaching that gospel, her own disclosures were preaching another story, because her household was collecting rent. And on top of that, you're preaching to cancel rent, but you're also not preaching on the back end that you're going to get guaranteed rent from the government, okay? So they had a Mattapan property pulling between $50,000 and $100,000 in just a few years as a rental. Then they had two more Boston units bringing in 15 to, I forget how much exactly, but they were bringing in a lot of money. And then they ended up selling a condo in Florida and generating this massive portfolio that has steady cash flow. Now, let me be clear. This is not illegal. Landlords do exist. Even progressive landlords obviously exist as well. But it collides pretty hard with the simplicity of her slogan. Cancel rent for America, cash rent at home. That's basically what it is. And when you build your political brand on being the voice of the tenant class, the contradictions aren't just awkward, they're absolutely lethal. This is hypocrisy 101. And after all, it doesn't mean this is some levels of an inconsistency by accident. This was on purpose. It means this was deliberate use of virtue as a shield for vice. So this is another layer of theater or some kind of performance here. It's absolutely astonishing to me that people could criticize landlords and then on the back end be collecting hundreds of thousands of dollars in rent and using the same savvy strategies, which I'll talk about in a second here, in order to build up their own portfolio, because that's realistically what happened here. And the reason that I know this is because I'm in the business. I pulled all of the mortgage records. I looked at all of these properties, and every single property ended up getting purchased by some very, very savvy ways, okay? The same exact ways that institutional investors that she ends up criticizing use. That's the truth, guys. That is the absolute truth, because you could even take a look at the Martha's Vineyard property, okay? This home was valued for over $1 million, okay? Over $1 million, and I believe this is either a vacation home / Airbnb or rental for them, okay? That's what this is. And you think about it like this. She considers herself the working class warrior. That's her narrative. But guess what? The new antagonist is her balance sheet. That's what happens. It's these Progressives are allowed to have the money, but nobody else is. That's at least how it seems to me. And she hasn't just attacked landlords in some abstract way. She's gone again after institutional investors, corporate landlords, these Wall Street firms, accusing them of gobbling up homes with cash, leveraging their debt, and driving up prices that push families out. But when you crack these things open, her own filings are doing the exact same thing. The same leverage strategies that the people that she's condemning, they are using. Specifically, at least based on tax records, her husband is using, okay? This is the same level of financial engineering that she is criticizing. So, for instance, instead of putting like 20 or 25% down, like most investors have to, they've used 5% down payment loans. They've used FHA renovation loans that actually exceeded the purchase price of the foreclosure that they bought. That one was specific, I believe, in Mattapan. And they refinanced their vacation home in Martha's Vineyard to extract even more equity out. So in plain English, they figured out how to play Monopoly with the house money. That's basically what this is. And most landlords have to buy. They usually buy with cash, or they take out equity from another property to afford the down payment, okay? But within the Pressley household, they figured out a way to drive a car off the lot with a $1 down payment, and that's what's happening here. It's absolutely legal, by the way, but is it hypocrisy? 100% off the damn charts. And don't forget, in 2025, Harris, Conan Harris, that's her husband, his consulting firm, they secured a multi-million-dollar city contract under Mayor Michelle Wu, adding, I would say, some levels of fuel to the suspicion that City Hall has like this velvet rope for insiders, while everybody else, every regular Bostonian, they fight tooth and nail just to get a damn apartment. So what we have here is what I like to call a double standard, or double exposure. Double exposure photography. Let's use this. One image of Pressley on the House floor demanding justice for renters, demanding systemic changes, and calling landlords parasites, and another image, let's say a little bit fainter, but very real, of her household cashing rent checks, flipping condos, extracting equity, and now holding a stake in a public land development that's supposed to embody fairness. How does this continue to happen? That's why I called this the Ayanna Pressley Paradox, because the let's say the front-facing brand says one thing, but the back-facing balance sheet, that says another. And the tension between those two images is where trust evaporates. And nobody is talking about this, not to this extent. And maybe it's because they didn't pull the tax records. Maybe it's because they didn't pull the mortgage information. I don't know what it is, but I decided to do that. Now, historically, of course, this isn't something that's new. This has been happening all throughout history. You could look hundreds of years in the past, and there has been hypocrisy that has happened time and time again. It's just now it's much louder because people, like, they get on a video like this and they preach one thing, and then they're doing the thing that they're preaching about on the back end. Okay, that's how it goes. A good example of that, I'll give you one. Back in 2008, during the financial crisis, lawmakers, they were blasting Wall Street with their greed and all these other things. And then at the nighttime, they were holding fundraisers for Goldman Sachs for their executives. Okay, that's realistically what happened there. So I would say hypocrisy has always been the Achilles heel for many people that want to try reforms. I don't know if it's because they feel disenfranchised, they're not part of that system. I don't know what it is psychologically, but something is going on there. But here's the deal. I think that once the public sees this mask slip, and once they realize that these sermons don't match their lifestyle, I think that their entire ideology, it just collapses. And that's the real cost here. It's not just, let's say, reputation, it's the credibility of tenant advocacy itself. So she gets up again, she starts talking about this stuff. How could anybody believe her when she's doing the same exact thing on the back end? You see what I'm saying here? So every single time I see another cancel rent landlord get exposed, every time the receipts end up showing cash flow contradicting the slogans, it just hands ammunition to people like me and to, anybody that's trying to oppose her. That's basically what this does. It's a terrible, terrible look, guys. It really is terrible because they effectively don't practice what they preach. And that ends up basically poisoning the well. That's what it does. It ends up poisoning the well because this is, again, I don't understand why they do this, but it's very strange to me. It is a very, very strange thing to me. And I think that is basically the tragedy of the hypocrite. I think that's what it is. I really think that's what it is. So what we're left with here is this paradox of canceling rent for the people, but cashing rent for the household, okay? Collect profits from land sales and then spin it all as some kind of equity. And, maybe she'll see this, maybe she won't. I don't really care. It would be a lot different if you were forthcoming with these things and not trying to advocate for one thing and then do something on the back end. You see what I'm saying? That's not how these things should work, guys, okay? And I guess to wrap this up, the question I'll leave you is with this. Do you accept that this is politics as usual? Do we just shrug this stuff off and say everybody does it? Or do we actually demand that people who preach fairness actually practice it at home, even when it costs them money? Because trust me, if hypocrisy, it just keeps on winning here, the people will just keep losing. That is what is going to happen. And I'm willing to bet, look, the Harris deal in Roxbury, I went through so many documents with that deal. I couldn't necessarily find any, any wrongdoing that was upfront and personal. Okay. Now, whether or not there was text messages and emails and all this other stuff similar. Remember I said the MassDOT deal is going to taint a lot of the picture of other deals' reality and what I think about how these people get deals, how these insiders are getting deals. This is a perfect example of that. I wasted a ton of time, waiting to record this because I was scrubbing every little detail of this, but I couldn't find anything. And that is a good thing that I couldn't find anything. At least I couldn't find anything yet. If somebody sees this video, knows something more than me, please send it over to me and I'll make a follow-up video to this. But the reality of the hypocrisy, it still stands firm. You can't say cancel rent while you're simultaneously not telling the public that you're still going to collect rent on the back end through the federal government, okay? That's essentially what was going to happen during the COVID era. It wasn't just canceling rent and canceling mortgages. The landlords were still going to get paid, including her. Okay, including her. And then with all of these purchases on all of these properties, which, by the way, I don't see her name on many of these things. I saw an LLC originally for the Martha's Vineyard property that ended up transferring for $1 to Conan Harris and then refining out for like $150,000 more. I don't understand. They ended up going through some kind of Airbnb financer. Okay, that's or like a short-term rental financer, and they're getting these absolute minimum low payment style loans so that they could buy up more properties. They're leveraging and again, this is not illegal, guys. It takes some time to learn how to do these things. It's absolutely not illegal, but the reality is that it's the same exact system that the institutional investors that she condemns is using. Okay, I just want to drive that point home. That is 100% what is happening here. So if she comes out again and starts talking about this stuff, I just want you to remember this video, okay? Just remember this video because that is the truth of what is going on. And believe me when I tell you, I can almost guarantee you that she is not the only one using these tricks to get rich. Guaranteed. That's it for today's video, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.